What job did you work at that was so bad? You quit on the same day you were hired? Like us to read you more awesome Reddit topics? Just like and subscribe to our channel. A vacuum cleaner sales job. They explained that I'd have to go to people's houses and offer to clean one room for them with the vacuum and I'd get paid if during my vacuum demo, they bought a vacuum. Nah, I'm good. I like the vacuum though. An ex of mine worked for Kirby. If I recall correctly, he was expected to be in a person's house for 2 hours to sell them this goddamn vacuum. I wouldn't want a salesman in my house for 10 minutes. He lasted maybe a month and then his paycheck bounced, which meant our rent check bounced. It was a mess, much like our relationship. When the Kirby people came to our house one time, my parents got them drunk. I think we ended up getting a discount on our vacuum because of it. I was like 12 and more concerned with what was happening on Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm 22 and I'm still more concerned about what's happening in Avatar than outside. Can confirm. I'm 28 and still more concerned with what's happening in Avatar than the outside. We had a Kirby salesperson come to my family's house about a decade ago. The thing is a heavy beast, but it still runs and is great. My parents got it. But to be honest, the lightweight shark we got for the upstairs to stop carrying it around works just as well, and even if we replace it every year it'd be cheaper than the Kirby still. Worked at a recycling plant for medical supplies. My job was to get inside the compressing machines and clean them. The machines were filled with blood needles and shit. It was absolutely disgusting. Plus the place was infested with rats. Bruh, that's horrifying. That's literally horrifying. I'm a phlebotomist and regularly utilize sharp spins for used needles and bloody supplies. I always wondered what the process was like after the sharp spin left our facility. Yeah, if you got poked you had to immediately go to the hospital. Probably the worst part was they didn't give me the proper details before I started. I thought it was just regular residential trash. Didn't realize it was medical stuff until I stepped into the machine. Stepping into machines. I hope it was locked out. I did AC work for a medical waste facility and we regularly saw giant carts full of needles and other stuff. Super scary, and the smell was just awful throughout the whole plant. Retrieving used formwork. 10 guys throwing 20 kilograms pieces of nail-infested timber down from 5 floors up. My job was to dodge the falling bits of timber and avoid stepping on nails while I did it for 10 hours a day. Frick that. No first aid guy on site. Got a nail through each foot on my first day, which I disinfected, bandaged and went back to work. Lomeo, what the frick, I've actually done formwork and false work and the stripping before, and the guys I worked with would rightfully lose their shit if you didn't pull the nails or otherwise make them safe. They're actually specially designed to be pulled anyway, let alone tossing them down where people could get hit. Then again, that was a union job. Where was this? OSHA would probably like a word with then. Some help desk job. Recruiter lied his ass off. You gotta be careful with them. I've been sent into some bogus interviews because a recruiter just wanted to meet his quota. Another tip an old guy told me was to always send your resume as PDF. Recruiters will tweak your resume without your asking just to try and get you into an unqualified interview, and it'll set your ass up for failure. And always take a hard copy of your resume to the interview. I once had a recruiter helpfully add a bunch of Java experience to my resume. I hate Java. I was very confused when I realized I was being interviewed for a Java programmer position, at least the interviewer, and I had a good laugh when we compared my resume to the one the recruiter sent. I have been on 2 of the 3 sides of this. I had a recruiter add stuff to my CV many times. They'd add a JS framework or something. And one time I was asked several specific questions about what they'd added, which was weird, because they'd added poker to the interest section at the end. As a joke at my expense, it would take too long to explain. As an interviewer, I've had a candidate come in and discover his CV was just made up. Nothing at all like what he submitted. He was very professional, really knew his stuff, and had a hard copy with him just in case. We spent 5 minutes laughing at the recruiter and comparing the CVs. Offered him a role in the end. Not the one he'd come in for though. The version he'd been sold didn't exist and he didn't have the skills for the one we thought we were interviewing him for. I just need to become a recruiter and make a load of shit up and I'll have the set. Yeah, this happens all the time in IT. Those recruiters can be the worst, man. Noted. That's a great tip. I was 18 and it was as a waitress for a fancy retirement home, where they made meals to order for the residents who all ate in a communal facility. Somehow we were responsible for knowing a person's dietary restrictions, but there was no list of people with dietary restrictions as its protected health info. We were just supposed to figure it out. For example, if grandma was allergic to peanuts, forgot and ordered a dish with peanuts, we were held responsible. The men keep smacking my butt with their napkins and making inappropriate comments, which was fine with management, because they were old, senile. My first shift was supposed to be covering breakfast, lunch, 8 HRS, but because so many people quit mid-shift it became a mandated double. I lasted 1 day. Of the 15 people I trained with, only one made it 2 weeks. That's not right, or legal I think, to withhold dietary restrictions of residents. I used to work in a retirement as a chef. Dining staff is considered a caregiver and allowed access to that information. The assisted living residents ate in a restaurant setting as well. Servers would take orders and ring it into a POS system. It had to be rung in under the resident's name, because it would display their dietary restrictions. We also had a printed out list of residents with restrictions for quick reference. As the sous chef, I even had to update restrictions nurses made if a dietary technician wasn't there. We also had the right to downgrade their diet to soften foods or thicken drinks if we noticed them struggling to eat. Only the speech therapist and nutritionist could upgrade them to regular food. I worked food service in a long-term care residence and every member of the dining staff had access to a binder filled with restrictions, allergies, and recommendations for any resident we might be feeding. And I bet they were all thinking, young people are so lazy these days. Away at college, needed a job, got hired on at a national pizza chain, with a table involved. Anyway, show up the first day and quickly notice every single person working there is tweaking. Everyone. No way I was going to deal with a bunch of fricking tweakers, and quit after my first shift. Manager asked why, and I told him, because everyone here is tweaking. His response, how did you know? Maybe it was the dilated eyes, the fact everyone here is sweating like it's 113 degrees out. Yet I need a long sleeve shirt to stay warm? Pardon my ignorance, but what's a tweaker? Someone who takes meth, high as frick, but not in the fun way. Think like dancing in Spot. With that gonna frick you till you love me intense look in their eyes, as they sweat ungodly amounts of liquid. Shit's nasty. I was working at a restaurant. A coworker told me the boss asked him if he would sell him his passport. Different coworker said the boss asked him to be a guarantor in a totally blank passport application. Some customers came up to me to say they overheard some men on the patio talking about trafficking people, like, in the way that they were discussing plans to do it. Unbeknownst to them, one of these men was the owner. Owner was from Albania, by the way. Not trying to generalize, but they are known to be one of the human trafficking hotspots. I quit that day and called the RCMP, sort of like Canada's FBI. Did they find anything? I never heard back from the authorities, but the guy is a scumbag. Sadly, I see he has opened up in other restaurants and so I guess he remains a free man. Sometimes law enforcement agencies will let people operate until they can build a solid case. Oh yeah, listening to small town dongs, it's one of the biggest headache they deal with is getting the case a slam dunk. If you come to court with less than solid proof, not only is the criminal free, he knows he's on radar, so they will just be low-key or just all out leave. Run on sentence, my bad. When I was 14, I got a job at one of the few fast food places in town that hired kids under 16. I went to orientation, where they explained the positions different age groups could fill. My job would be to take people's orders out to their cars. I wasn't allowed to touch money or work the fryer. I showed up on the first day and was told my whole shift would be on the fryer. I told them I was 14 and not allowed to, plus I hadn't been trained on it. The guy basically said tough shit and tried to hand me a hairnet. I just left. Day. I'm glad you left. Inexperienced people should be nowhere near hot, bubbling oil. Not only his own safety, but there are also a lot of regulations in food service about how food must be handled before, after it is cooked. An untrained employee could unwittingly give dozens of people food poisoning in a single shift. Op absolutely did the responsible thing, making up for the irresponsible management. If I sneeze on food that is still sizzling, will the sizzling kill most of the germs? Virus? If you mean the oil. Yes, but it's still very gross and should be avoided. Your story reminds me of my first job. I worked as a cashier, carry-out, stocker, etc. Basically every position in the store. I was working as a cashier and we have to call a code 21 whenever anyone tries to buy alcohol. Now I was only 16 at the time and I didn't go through any of the process for a bar card. Didn't know it freaking existed. My manager said just show us the alcohol and check the ID. Learned from a coworker 2 months into the job that what I was doing was illegal, and if an undercover alcohol checker person showed up and I didn't have the card, I could get in a lot of trouble and possibly fined. Told my manager that if he didn't take me through the procedures to get the card, I would quit. His excuse was, oh yeah, I knew there was something I was forgetting. I applied for a job online titled Feeding Baby Pigs. I got a call from a man and he gave me a vague description of the job and said I could come to the pig barn and have a chat about it. So I showed up and he continues to talk about it in a way that gave me a weird vibe. He seemed very desperate to hire somebody. He ran it by me that occasionally a piglet may need to be put down, so I figured that's what the elephant in the room was. I show up my first day at 7 a.m. and I enter the barn. You are required to shower off before you enter due to human swine disease contraction. After that I enter and the first thing I smell is the strongest odor of ammonia I have ever smelt. The place was like prison cells of 500-pound pigs and my job was to feed them. I was instructed to shock them with a shocking stick if they were lying down and wouldn't get up to eat, which I didn't like. Sometimes you had to repeatedly do it and it felt cruel. I continue to follow around this woman who is sort of touring me around, training me. I'm noticing piles of dead and blackened piglets in the aisleways. I guess it's common for the mothers to accidentally roll on them and squish them, because they are so massive. I mentioned the overpowering smell of ammonia, but what was even worse was the amount of flies in the place. And they were so aggressive, you could barely take a breath without literally breathing in a fly, and if you did, it was a polluted breath of pure ammonia. I'm continuing the tour and still pretty much only feeding massive 500-pound pigs. At the end of our feeding round we finally get to the place where the piglets are. There are slightly bigger pens with mothers nursing very small newborn-like piglets. There's a couple pens with a mother specifically for feeding runts from other pens that weren't strong enough to fight for a tit. What I learned was if the runts in these pens still show no signs of being able to nurse, we need to put them down. The method of putting these newborn piglets down is to grab them by their hind legs and basically tomahawk them on the cement floor so that the back of their head hits first. I asked my trainer how often this needs to be done, because I was told it was only seldom, and she said it's a daily occurrence. I told her right then that I don't have it in me to do that, let alone every day, and that I would not be able to sleep at night if I did this for a living. I said I don't see myself pursuing this and don't want to waste anybody's time. I didn't mention all the other stuff to her. I used the baby pig killing as a point to get me out of there. I was only in there for 2 or 3 hours, but when I got home I had a cough and sore throat for the rest of the day from the ammonia. By far the worst job I ever had. I came here to share a very similar story, not mine, but my mom's. Her first job was at her local wildlife discovery museum here in my city. They have a year-round exhibit showing the stages of embryos, literally eggs in incubators at different development stages, and every day new chicks hatch in the hatching section of the exhibit. Her job was to get rid of the baby chicks and move the eggs up a section. Get rid of the chicks meant grabbing them by the feet and slamming their heads against the countertop. She said the guy training her, 17-18-year-old young man, was having way too much fun with it. She quit before she started. What the frick did I just read? This is by far the most horrible response to this askreddit question. Frick that place. I worked for a company installing security systems and cameras. I was sent on a project to install a few new cameras and maintain a few others. We had to drop our tools and equipment off 24 hours before and shower in and out. I can still smell the ammonia now and vividly remember the 6-foot pile of dead pigs I had to install a camera over. The cameras I was servicing were so horribly corroded from the heavy ammonia and humidity they were no longer functional. This was apparently constant cycle. Most disgusting thing I've ever done, and I was spared the tomahawking. While reading this I thought, oh well, that must be some brutal piglet killings. They only use thoughts a few places. So did a quick search, and it turns out that ALET of European Department of Agricultures actually recommend this method as well. A single blow to the piglet's head and neck, on the floor, will cause a fraction to the skull. This will lead to death. Damn! I guess it's easier to enjoy your pork when you don't think about the condition of how it were made. By the way, first post in English, so bear with me. Hope you get the point.